So this video on relationships and families is going to look at family planning, and we're going to consider different religious perspectives as to what that constitutes, as well as a lot of the practicalities around what it means for a couple to plan a family. So without further ado, the most straightforward element of this is the definition that we're going to see. Um, which is that family planning is the planning of when to have a family and how many children to have. It's something that is done often in society by couples. And, as we're going to sort of see as we move through this concept, it's certainly something that a lot of couples might feel is like the fulfillment of their relationship in terms of having a family. Some people will feel that that is the purpose of them being together. And when we look at society, there's a lot of provision for the way that families operate. Particularly here in the UK, if we think about free education or free healthcare, and again, especially when it comes to children, sort of there's lots of added provision for that. So we look at the NHS providing things like free dentistry for children. All of these things are factored in when a couple sort of looking to plan their future might then think about, when are they having a family? And certainly there are lots of things to think about. When it comes to having a family, you couples will want to have, a happy life with their family. Children want to be things that are cherished and valued. And certainly, when you look at a lot of people in society, you see that that is very, very important to them. They want to think carefully about the whole process of sort of growing as a couple in a relationship and then feeling ready to have children. And having said that, some will feel that you're never completely ready to have children and sort of understand exactly what family life is going to look like. But that's part of the adventure that I think lots of parents will tell you as well once they've had children that sort of you can't plan meticulously every single moment, whether it's finances or size of house or other things, time available. All of these things are factors when having a family. But certainly, you'll get to a stage, or people get to a stage in life when they feel like they're in the moment when they want to have a family. That has changed certainly over the course of time and history. All sorts of things have been a factor to that. So when we look at, like, for example, average life expectancy, the fact that particularly in Western society, the average age that people live to has got longer, that has changed when people choose to try and have children. Certainly historically, you would have seen people, and I'm talking sort of thousands of years ago now, it was a lot more common for people to be having children as sort of teenagers or in their sort of late teens or early 20s, because, with lower life expectancy, that was something that was a normal process. The further history progressed, we've seen that changing. And certainly these days, again, particularly with reference to the UK, we tend to see couples often in their 30s now planning to have children. All that certainly isn't limited to that. And again, you see couples in their 40s doing the same. There are all sorts of different things that will affect when people choose to have a family. And of course, being in a relationship is going to be a very important factor as part of that. Those that feel like they're in a long-term relationship in their 20s will be able to plan those things differently to those people who don't enter into long-term relationships until their 30s or maybe even 40s. So all of these things are part of what a couple will consider when they're considering, what their family might look like and how that might progress. So certainly one question is, why do people practice family planning? It's actually a really important thing in society. I think certainly the government would recommend that people actually do family planning, think carefully, especially when it comes to things like sort of time and finances, and having some of the basics in place that are ready to provide for children. At a basic level, if you're living in a one-bedroom flat, it's going to be difficult to accommodate a family. Obviously, conversely, if you're all living in a house which has 3 or 4 bedrooms, then that space is obviously there. So one thing will be in terms of costs. People will think about the costs that are involved when having children, and you can see some of them there. So food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, entertainment. All of those things need to be factored in when people are thinking about, are they ready to have children? Are people holding down jobs that are going to pay them well enough so they can support a family? Because as you can see there, once you bring in extra people, obviously the children aren't earning any money themselves, so it is a case of, parents providing all of these things. Now, assistance is available. Often grandparents are likely to help out in some way, shape, or form with lots of these things. The government, as I've already mentioned, will provide some of these things for free anyway. So when we look at healthcare, basic healthcare provision, so in the UK, being able to go to hospital, have children, make sure they've got their immunisation ready and all that sort of thing. Parents don't have to pay for that. That's an ongoing part of national health insurance. Having said that, obviously basic healthcare like sort of Calpol if children are mildly under the weather. Or some, other additional bits and pieces, maybe sort of types of shampoo or soaps, that parents might look to try and make sure that if their skin, children's skin reacts differently to different products, that is something that's going to be something to think about. So, that is one element of family planning. Are they at a level where they think they can afford to have children? And that's certainly one reason why, especially in the UK, but other Western countries as well, we're seeing couples becoming older before deciding they're going to start to have a family. Because, when you're first in a job, clearly you're going to be earning less money. The more experience you get, the more qualified you become, the further you progress in a particular job, the more you're likely to be paid. And therefore, the easier that some of these things are. Food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and entertainment are the only things that might cost money. You can add in sort of holidays, some elements of education. Even in the UK, if you're attending state schools where education is free, that doesn't change the fact that people will be paying for uniform, stationery, footwear. All of these sorts of things will be a factor when wanting to make sure that children have a really good education. And the UK is very, very lucky that there are so many excellent schools that provide that. But if you were to look at a different country, that wouldn't necessarily be the same. Different countries around the world have different levels of provision when it comes to education. Lots of governments try to make sure there is free provision. But for example, there are some schools in other countries where the government can only provide half day schooling. So it means that each school has essentially double the number of pupils. They will have one set of pupils before lunch, one set of pupils after lunch, because that's what the government can afford. Anyway, so there are lots of costs associated with having children, and clearly that's going to be something that parents will want to factor in when they're looking to plan a family. Time is another thing. There are so many different jobs these days, and different jobs require different levels of time commitment. Some jobs are incredibly regular. So someone's working from 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning to sort of 6 o'clock, 5:30, or maybe a bit later than that, and that's very regular. And they have a set holiday pattern. So lots of companies will give sort of 20 or 28 days a year worth of holiday, and therefore, what your holiday entitlement is. And so you can think about, weekends, evenings, holidays, how do you factor in that time where you're going to be able to have children? However, clearly there are other jobs that have very, very different ways in which they work. So jobs that require shifts might change whether or not somebody is thinking about having children. So, for example, those in the medical profession, particularly when you're training, you have to take on night shifts and you get placed in different hospitals. And someone, for example, is training to be a GP. They might wait until they've reached that level in order to then think about having children, because once someone becomes a GP, then their hours tend to become more regular, and that might give them the more flexibility. But other jobs like a pilot take them overseas, or those who sort of run or lead businesses might find themselves traveling lots. And again, so what they might do is think about, when am I going to be in a position where I'm stationary in one place for longer, and that will give me the regularity, the time, the expectation to know that sort of children can be a part of that. This is certainly incredibly important to ensure that children feel wanted. Certainly in society, we want children to feel valued. We want it to be a celebration when a couple are having a child and looking forward to raising them, looking forward to becoming parents. And certainly there's a lot in society where you see people blogging on this or posting about sort of the anticipation of having a family and the excitement that builds in people. Sadly, there are situations in society when sometimes people find that they're expecting a child and it's not necessarily what they planned or anticipated, and that changes the picture. And so, we've got to think about how a couple is when they're looking ahead to the notion of having children. Certainly, it's incredibly important that children feel valued, and that is again sort of a really important part of family planning because, like I said, a couple wants to be excited when they're having a child. Obviously, abortion is a thing in society that we have to think very carefully about. It was brought in back in the 1960s in the UK, and again, linked to the previous point. Obviously, if people are looking ahead to having children, if someone becomes pregnant in a place that's going to be difficult for them, then obviously some people will then find themselves considering whether or not an abortion is something that is essential. However, if couples are more careful about these sorts of things, it certainly would possibly reduce unnecessary abortions. And again, sort of that's part of the element there. Um, and finally, to safeguard a relationship or a marriage, there are lots of people who would say that having children would be the fulfillment of their particular relationship. Um, Certainly as people get older, getting into their 20s and 30s, there is that desire for people to have children. And so, lots of people, when they're getting into a relationship, that will be part of the discussion. What do you think about having children? How many children might you think you want? And these things aren't straightforward. Obviously, medically speaking, there are issues that come alongside these things. Some people sadly find they're unable to have children, or some people might find that they've had one or two and hoped for more, and then find that they can't for one reason or another. Um, so these things often are part of discussions between a couple, and certainly, when we come to look at thinking about why people get married, this is often an important question for couples thinking about, well, if they're getting married, what's the next step? What would happen after marriage? And whether or not a couple chooses to have children is often an important question as part of that. And so for some people, knowing that they're able to have children and therefore having those children, that becomes the fulfillment of their relationship or their marriage. Um, they feel that was the purpose of it, and suddenly they're in their own new family unit. And that's incredibly valuable for an awful lot of people. Um, Clearly linked to this is going to be contraception. Sort of the notion of family planning is inherently part of this because obviously people using contraception sensibly and safely would enable them to think about, when they're ready to have children, and would help them plan that a lot more carefully. Now, when we think about views on contraception, it is possible that you'll get a question in the exam thinking about what are the different religious views on contraception in society. And really, we only have one element of contrast here. So, strictly speaking, when we look at Catholic teaching, they disagree with the use of contraception. Sort of strict Catholic teaching says that it interferes with the creation of life, and that should be God's decision. So when we look at sort of particularly Genesis, although some other parts of the Bible as well, it talks about God commanding people to have children, to, as it says here, be fruitful and increase in number. He says that to Adam and Eve. And so strict Catholic teaching would say that contraception interferes with this process, especially artificial or permanent contraception. And therefore, uh, if you're looking at an exam question which says, explain two different religious views on contraception, this is kind of the contrast. This is the one that says that they disagree, strictly speaking, with contraception. Most other denominations, including, as you can see, Anglicans here, would say that contraception is an acceptable part of family planning. It helps ensure that one family doesn't get too big. And certainly when we think about how parents are looking to provide for their children, and like I said, whether that's financial, whether that's to do with housing, whether it's to do with holidays or other things, part of education. All of these things are factors that come alongside family planning. And certainly, if you were to look at a very basic teaching like love your neighbour as yourself, that would clearly be part of parents thinking about how their children. They wish to love their children. They want them to be happy and healthy, and therefore part of that would knowing that you've got to have enough time for each child. And to demonstrate that care, Anglican teaching would say that contraception, as you can see there, is an acceptable part of family planning. Methodists, Baptists, other denominations would tend to agree with that as well. Um, and to be perfectly honest, so do Buddhists and Muslims. Um, they would also say that contraception is an acceptable part of family planning. Certainly, if we think about Buddhist teaching, in terms of karma or right action, the right thing to do is to try and make sure you're doing the right thing by one's children, and therefore trying to make sure that you have enough time for them, money for them, and so on and so forth. That would be something that Buddhism would support, because what you're looking to do is raise happy and healthy children. Um, Having many children that might change that particular family situation, and then if you find that you're unable to look after children properly, that could, as it says there, create bad karma as far as they're concerned. Within Islamic teaching as well, again, there's this encouragement that sort of contraception is used as part of family planning. Muhammad encourages people to look after children properly. And actually, if you look at Islamic law as well, even before artificial contraception was a thing in society, there's a notion of using what we might call natural contraception to try and facilitate proper family planning. Um, Linked to that is abortion. We don't tend to look at abortion as a standalone topic. If we were doing a different topic, we might do. But in terms of its link to the notion of either family planning or contraception, strictly speaking, if you look at the teaching of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, it sort of implies that people shouldn't use abortion as part of family planning. Clearly, there are other situations in society where abortion is something that people discuss, and where it's necessary, and what access people should or shouldn't have to it. That's not really part of the topic here. The link here is to whether or not abortion is part of family planning, and strictly speaking, religious teaching would probably disagree with that. Um, when it comes to other things in society, like I said, there won't be questions as part of relationships and families on that topic. But here are three teachings that would support that notion, whether or not it's do not harm any living thing or the sanctity of life, or as you can see from Islam, there, do not kill the soul. Strictly speaking, those teachings would say that abortion shouldn't be a part of family planning per se. So that tends to conclude the notion on family planning. Um, Hopefully that helps you understand that. Like I said, it's a case of thinking about why people would plan to have a family, and again, bringing in the religious element to that, which generally speaking is very much so encouraging of it. Like I said, obviously we notice that particular Catholic teaching of contraception, and that has to be a factor of the way we understand these things as well. But certainly all religions would encourage sensible family planning. Okay, and we will pause things there.